This month or this quarter, we are focusing on processing waste management. So this is a continuation of an ongoing conversation about processing waste, which we know is a huge challenge, and we'll hear a lot about that today. And hopefully today we'll also hear about some potential solutions or begin to brainstorm, ways that we can address this in a way that works for all different members of the local meat economy. So you may have joined us in November of 2022. That was before my time. But if you have not, I'm happy to share that recording. And at the end, I'll share a couple of other really interesting waste webinar presentations that I think can be a good jumping off place if you happen to be new to this work or you just want a refresher. With that, this is kind of the agenda of what we're here to do today. So I'm going to do a short welcome and kind of frame us a little bit more broadly on why we're here, what WA Meetup is for, because it's been a little while since we had the last call, and then there was a big break before that. So I think it's important, to just ground ourselves in what we're all here to do, and start the conversation from that framework. And then we'll hear from Cullen Naumoff from the Department of Ecology, get some updates on the organics management law, which I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are excited to hear about. There was a new little bit to the law passed during this last legislative session. And then, of course, Ecology has been working on implementing that law on behalf of the Washington State Legislature. So we'll hear about that. After that, Dr. Rachel Weemy from WSU is going to highlight some upcoming opportunities and some of the work that she's been doing, particularly in the animal composting side of things. Some exciting opportunities for additional training if that's a waste management strategy that you're interested in. After that, we have Dr. Jennifer Martin from Colorado State University. Dr. Martin is part of the Animal Protein Theme Team with the USDA's Regional Food Business Center. On top of all of her duties at CSU, that's how she came to be known to us here at WA Meetup. And so she's going to talk about some interesting developments in the rendering industry that may have ripple effects kind of coming down the line for rendering as an option for waste management. And then, of course, we want to save a little bit of time at the end to hear from you, hear what you're interested in. And yeah, that'll definitely take us till 10:30. So ready to get started. So for those of you who may not know me, my name's Sarah Lemon. I'm the local meat marketing specialist with the Washington State Department of Agriculture. You may have worked with Alyssa Umars in the past. So I took over for Alyssa in October of this past year and have been working in this role supporting small and direct marketing livestock producers and the processors that they depend on to be able to get that meat to market. Very excited to be able to continue this work. And as part of that, part of my responsibility is getting to convene these WA Meetup calls. WSDA Regional Markets was one of the original co-founders of WA Meetup. And so that's kind of the reason why you might be thinking, oh, why is the WSDA here? What are they doing? Well, we started WA Meetup with our esteemed colleagues at WSU in the recognition that, there's a very diverse community in our local meat world here in Washington, and it's going to take all of us to support that local meat economy. So that's a little bit about me. This is my contact information. You can book online. Happy to help in any way that I can. Just a reminder about regional markets. We are the Small Farms Direct Marketing Assistance arm of the WSDA. So our work is really focused on supporting producers of all types, so not just meat producers, but certainly meat producers are a big part of what we do, but supporting those producers that are selling direct to consumer in Washington through a variety of different ways. And we also, value the incredible agriculture that happens in the state, the incredible products that are available. And so part of our work is also supporting getting those products into the hands of Washingtonians, whether it's through farm to school or through other market opportunities, other institutions. That is a big part of what we do as well. So if you're looking for that type of help, Misha Ide is on the call here. She's got a beautiful background. She's the small farms direct marketing specialist, and works with all different types. So she's a great person to know. Feel free to contact her in the chat, and we can share her contact information as well. And then this program that's supporting WA Meetup is the Meat and Poultry Assistance Program. So similar to the broader regional markets program, this portion of the program is really specific to poultry and meat producers. So we support farmers and ranchers that sell direct to consumer in Washington. And that, of course, means that we need to support the processors that they depend on, and that we all depend on for having meat available to our local consumers. And we do that through providing technical assistance. We provide assistance from marketing, regulatory assistance, helping you understand how to get your meat legally to the consumer is kind of our main bread and butter. And then things like this, collaborating with producers, collaborating with processors and other resource providers to solve key issues, because we know there are a lot of issues facing the small meat economy in Washington. And the more of us that are working on that, and the more of us that can work together with our different perspectives, with our different backgrounds, different frames of reference, I think the more successful we're going to be at addressing these challenges and creating a viable local meat economy going forward. Just to note, the program is relatively new. I guess we've been going for about 4 years now. It's been funded one time. The funding has been through a series of one-time funding allocations from the legislature. We're in a position now to ask for additional ongoing funding come this next upcoming January session. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to keep the program going, but if that doesn't get funded, then we'll have to rethink how meat and poultry assistance happens in the state of Washington. So if you have thoughts about the program, feel free to reach out to your local representative and let them know what you think about this work. Okay, so that's a little bit about me, a little bit about our programs, and I would love to now hear a bit about you. I think it's helpful just to know kind of who's in the room. So I'm going to try to launch a poll. Okay, you should have access to a poll. Just a little bit of information about who's here, where you're from, how you tie into the meat world. You could fill that out and I will share the results with everybody. And while you do that, I'd like to introduce just a couple other folks. We'll introduce the speakers as they come on, but I'd like to introduce Laura Raymond, who is the manager of the Regional Markets Program. Laura, do you want to just say hi?
Sure, yes, I was slow to join. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you all. I'm Laura Raymond. I lead the Regional Markets Program at Washington State Department of Ag. And I'm going to take this opportunity, Sarah, to say it seems as though you're sharing the results of the survey. And at least on my screen, I'm not able to select an option. I don't know if others are having that experience.
I think that's because you're a host.
Me, because I'm a co-host, but wanting to check in with everyone else. Are you able to fill out the poll? Thumbs up.
I have the same thing, Laura. I think it's because we're all logged into the WSDA account.
Okay, great. As long as it works for others, that's great.
Yep, Laura, I was able to fill out the poll.
Okay, great. I'd also like to introduce Jennifer Bryan Goforth. She is a longtime member of the WSU community, but a new member of the WSU Food Systems team. So WSU Food Systems is the other half of the group that started this collaboration of WA Meetup. And so she's available. She's going to be helping manage the WA Meetup website. Just a great person to know.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Marcy Ostrom could not make it today. She's doing a farm walk. I'm happy to be here and excited to work in some communications with this program. And yeah, looking forward to working more with everybody.
And then the last person I want to introduce is Emily Whittier. Emily is also recently joined the Food Systems Program as the Washington State Coordinator for the Regional Food Business Center. So this is this big center, 6 states working together to support agriculture in the regional area. So Emily's a great asset to have on our team and is a great person to connect with, especially if you want to get tied into some of the resources that are available through the RFBC. Misha and I and Laura are also part of that RFBC team, so we'll be continuing to share opportunities that come up through that facility, or not facility, through that entity. It's an electronic entity, and which includes, potential for some funding as well as additional technical assistance. So that's Emily up there if you want to say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the intro, Sarah. Glad to be here today. And I put my email in the chat if anybody wants to learn more about the Regional Food Business Center, but really excited to be here and work with Sarah, Laura, and Misha to support our meat producers across the state of Washington. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. All right, I'm going to end the poll and then share the results. So you can kind of see we've got folks here from few folks from Northwest Washington, a good representation from the South Sound, some folks from Central Washington, Spokane area. Love to see a good representation of the state here. Also lots of different types of producers, definitely a lot of beef folks in the house. Some folks that are none. Love to see that there's people that are both producers and non-producers. I think it's important that we're engaging with other resource providers as well as interested eaters. This issue of a Washington meat economy affects all of us. And so it's great to see that there. Yeah, very cool. All right. So why WA Meetup? So just as a reframing for those who might be new to WA Meetup or maybe coming here for the first time in a while, WA Meetup was started in 2019. It was modeled after the Cascadia Grains Project as a way to bring together all sorts of different folks that care about building a strong local Washington meat economy. It was started by WSDA and WSU, and it's really about network building. It's about network building, it's about creating connections, it's about sharing information, sharing resources to support strong, viable businesses in support of a strong, viable local Washington meat economy. And that includes every link along the supply chain. So that's everything from feed producers to processors, eaters, chefs, you name it. The idea was that WA Meetup would be sort of like a big tent. I've heard Alyssa describe it kind of as a big tent before, where everybody is welcome. And the goal is to uplift and promote this local Washington meat economy with the recognition that we're very diverse and that there's not necessarily any unifying trade organization like there might be with some other growers, like say apple growers or hop growers. There are, individual species, trade organizations, but there's nothing that really says these are all of us meat producers working together. And so the idea was to create WA Meetup in order to make these sort of connections that might not otherwise happen in order to promote the strong Washington meat economy. So again, it's open to everybody who cares about a strong local meat economy. Doesn't matter how involved you are, how experienced you are. We love having both new and kind of old hat, very experienced people in this community. And really the goal is, to provide formal and informal networking opportunities, to provide opportunities for learning and knowledge sharing, and then collaborative problem solving. And that happens in a lot of ways. Some of you some of you might have been lucky enough to participate in the original WA Meetup Summit back in 2019. Since then, we've had a number of in-person and online trainings, things like these calls, other webinars. Myself and Dr. Cooper and a number of other WSU staff and faculty were traveling all around the state doing these one-day workshops to the beginning of this year, as well as three-day workshops. That all happened under the WA Meetup umbrella. But ultimately, the benefit of WA Meetup, the benefit of all this is really what you and what we together can make of it. It's about those connections. It's about getting to know people. It's about finding new relationships and new ways to work together to solve these problems. So just a plug that the more involved that you are with WA Meetup, the better it's going to be. And love to be able to keep sharing your ideas, hearing your ideas for where WA Meetup can go from here. So that's why WA Meetup. Now, why waste? Well, there's a lot of waste. I'm not a meat scientist, I'll be honest, so I'm not sure if this chart is still relevant. I suspect with changes in industry, these numbers are a little bit different. But bottom line is that a lot of any given carcass is things that we would consider offal or trim or waste. So it's a really important issue just by virtue of the fact of how animals are processed. Additionally, through, talking about the WSDA Regional Meat and Poultry Assistance Program, didn't talk about how we do it, but we do a lot of one-on-one assistance and troubleshooting, in-person online trainings, grant making, and surveys and studies. And it's really through these sorts of technical assistances that we hear again and again and again that waste is a critical issue for small-scale meat processors. So we know, first off, there's a lot of waste. Two, we know it's an issue. And one that, given the regulatory environment that we're in, given kind of the economic environment that we're in, is becoming increasingly important to small producers. To that point, we actually at WSDA did a survey of small meat processors across Washington state, found that waste was one of the top issues, along with things like labor, cold storage infrastructure, general processing capacity. And then we also did a survey that you may have heard about in the fall. Gwen Vernon helped us with this, of composting facilities, and found that very few of them in the state will actually accept meat wastes. So if you're looking for an alternative to landfilling and you're looking at composting, it is an additional challenge to find a facility that may be able to accept those. We're hoping that that'll something that'll change in the future, but we did get kind of a baseline understanding of where that industry was at as well. So we know there's about 150 small processors across the state. 70% of those, because of challenges, either no access to rendering, no access to a composting facility, or very expensive options in those two areas. 70% of processors are landfilling, and that's about 6,000 pounds of waste per week, which is a huge amount of waste. And the crazy thing about that waste is that it's incredibly useful. So processing wastes are readily available, they're clean, and they're high value, nutrient dense resources that could be put to better use than just wasting away in a landfill, creating methane. They're great sources for feedstocks for compost. They're great sources for feedstocks for rendering and for both aerobic and anaerobic digestion. So it's really, in my personal opinion, a shame that these things are going to landfill when they could be put to a higher and better use. 20,000 small farms, ranches in Washington, that is an old number. It may have grown, might also be less, but this was Alyssa's most informed speculation. And of course, it's important for addressing climate change, which to keep these organic materials out of the landfill. And again, they're super useful if they could be used in some other way and produced into a useful and potentially saleable product. So that's the other thing, is that not only are these, valuable resources, but they can also be valuable pieces of a business's economic viability. So today we're going to learn about evolving waste disposal options, including composting and rendering. We're not going to touch as much on aerobic and anaerobic digestion because those are kind of newer areas we're interested in exploring, but know less of information about. And then we want to hear an update on the waste disposal rules and regulations from Cullen. And then again, I encourage you to talk to one another in the chat and really get to know the other folks that care about this issue and that are working to solve this similar challenge. And with that, I will turn it over to Cullen.
Super. Thanks so much, Sarah. Great to be here with everyone. In my previous life, I was always working with ag producers, so it's good to have an interaction with my previous life. So my goal today, I have some slides to share with everyone, is to talk about the organics management law and the impact thereof to everyone here on the call. By a show of raising your hands or some other reaction feature, how many folks are familiar with the organics management law? I'm going to go ahead. Okay, super helpful. I'm going to give a little bit of a primer then on it as well, just so that we're all on the same page. And Sarah did a good job teeing it up as well. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right, you all should be seeing it at this point, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so like I said, I'm Cullen, I'm the organics lead, and essentially at Ecology. And Ecology has been tasked with implementing this brand new suite of laws. And why are we? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Sarah absolutely touched on it, but generally, the idea of keeping organics out of the landfill, it is one of the most cost-effective climate strategies that the state can use to prepare ourselves for a better climate future. Maybe surprisingly, a significant contributor to our methane emission in the US are landfills. And as you all know, particularly those, who are working with cows, we recognize that methane is a much more potent greenhouse gas. And when I'm working with other agencies across the state, I think there's folks want to lean into like, a zero emission transportation future, but really addressing methane, particularly through organics management, is a much more effective way to decrease greenhouse gases and a much more cost-effective way to do that. And this is probably no surprise to you all, but organics make up a significant part of our landfill. So every 5 years, the state does what's called a waste characterization study, and they look at what is all made up of our landfills. And you see that over, just around 23% is organic. So this would be something like yard waste, yard debris, pre and post consumer food waste. But if you look at wood waste at 13.5 and paper at just under 20, the total makeup of organics in our landfill contributing to that methane is over 40%. So there's a real opportunity here to decrease our methane production and, as Sarah mentioned, use these resources to a higher and better value. So when we at the state and statute, this isn't how ecology says it, this is what the statute says. These are the things that includes organic waste. So, anything from pre and post consumer food waste to manure, food processing, garden and landscaping waste. Those are what we would, and certainly wood waste. Those are all what is considered in statute as organic material. And because of this climate imperative, the state has legislated significant organic diversion goals. So in a short 5.5 years, the goal is to divert 75% of that total organic material in the landfill away from it into other processing or into edible food recovery. So similarly, that second goal is around, we also know that a lot of edible food waste, certainly not awful, but edible food waste is going into the landfill. And so how do we recover that for Washingtonians who are, who are experiencing hunger, or again, just generally so we're not wasting that edible food. So with these significant goals, how are we going to reach them? And this was the impetus between the last two organic management laws that were passed in 22 and 2024. These are very significant and large pieces of legislation. So the two laws that were passed impacted more than 20 different laws in our statute, and those are big sweeping changes. So as I've been talking to folks, from school maintenance operators to county commissioners to meat producers, we're not expecting this change to happen overnight. But this is certainly a generational shift in terms of how we're thinking about our organic waste. There are 6 buckets of categories, or like 6 buckets / categories of how this law implements and or is working towards those big goals. There's a lot, right? Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every one of these today. Today, I really want to focus on the business organics management and this compost reimbursement program as the 2 pieces of the puzzle that certainly touch you all. So, business organic management requirements. What does this mean? So first and foremost, who is this apply to? And you can see here the official definition, but long story short, as a private producer, as a private farm at LLC, you all would be impacted. So you you would need to comply with these business requirements. However, there are different ways that you fall into this category. And and I'll talk through that here in a moment, but when we talk about a business organic management material requirement, the broad framing here is that businesses will be required to manage their organic waste. How you choose to manage it can look differently. So here are the ways that are spelled out in the law. Number 1, you could implement organic waste prevention strategies. Again, that's more difficult in the folks that were here on the call today. But this particularly applies to thinking about like food service programs or maybe schools thinking about food waste prevention. You could subscribe to our collection service. So this would be working with a compost facility to say, like, will you accept my awful waste? You can manage organic waste on site, and you'll hear from Rachel later around like what does it look like to compost this type of product. You could self-haul. So again, this still requires your compost facility to accept the material, but you don't necessarily have to sign up for curbside service. And then this again, curious how this might all apply to you, but this last bullet here. If you grow, harvest, or process food, you can enter into an agreement to sell or donate these materials to another business for offsite use. So would love to hear any kind of interesting partnerships you all could imagine on this front, but that would also qualify as compliance. Now, it is not, there are specific areas in which a business must meet these requirements, and these are called the business organics management areas, and you'll hear from here on, hear me refer to them as BOMAs. BOMAs are the blue areas here on the map, and the law indicates that BOMAs are identified based on 2 eligibility criteria. One is that there is a service provider that is willing to collect the waste in your area. And number 2 is that if there's a processor, like a compost facility, who is willing to process and has capacity to process it. So this law kicked in this year. And in 2024, these blue areas are where businesses were required to comply. The map is updated every year based on those 2 eligibility criteria, because the idea of the law is that it will incentivize more compost and service providers to begin operation throughout the state. So you can see here, this is the updated map for 2025. The orange represents the changes. So you can see there were some small areas in the Puget Sound areas that were impacted, as well as certainly parts of Chelan and Douglas and Grant counties. This map isn't quite official, probably another 5 days we'll get the official, but it won't really change much. This map will, so if you're looking at this area and you are not in a blue or orange area, you won't be required to comply in 25. This map will be updated every July, so you will want to keep tabs on how this map changes over time. That said, there's one more component to this, that for those producers that are currently in the blue or orange area on the map, there's another criteria that you'll need to meet, and that is based on the total volume of product you produce. So the law that kicked in this year, businesses that were in a BOMA had to generate at least 8 cubic yards of organic material waste per week. And if they did that, they needed to comply with the law. The volume thresholds decrease over time. In 25, it comes down to, if you are a producer that is producing 4 cubic yards of organic material waste per week, you will need to comply in 25 if you are in a BOMA area. And finally, when about 90 to 95% of businesses we expect to be impacted will be in 26, when the threshold requirement is 96 gallons of organic material waste. So again, when you're looking at this and asking yourself, am I required to comply? A, my farm has to be in one of the blue or orange shaded areas, and then B, you're understanding what volume of organic material or offal you're producing on a weekly basis. If you meet both of those criteria for 2025, you will be required to manage your organic waste. And you might be asking yourself, well, how will this be enforced? The law gives authority for enforcement to your local health jurisdiction. So of course that will be on a county by county basis. We work closely with the local health jurisdictions on this topic, and we meet with them monthly, generally, because again, this is a generational shift. Everyone is trying to simultaneously work together to build the airplane as we fly it. No local health jurisdiction is expecting to penalize businesses in the next couple of years. It is much more focused on technical assistance and education. Not to say that, enforcement from like a penalization from a fining perspective may start in the out years, but I just wanted you all know that if you are required to comply, the local health jurisdictions are really here to support you and not penalize you at this point. So I'll pause there maybe for any questions. That I feel like was a big questions about that. And if any come in the chat, I'm hoping, Sarah, you could let me know. Clear as mud, huh? Well, I'll let you marinate on that while I just hit another high point here. So
I have a quick question,
yeah,
Cullen.
great.
If you go back to the map, maybe I missed it. Can you explain the difference between the blue and the orange?
Yeah, of course. So this is this map changes every year. So this is the 2024 map. The orange areas here are just the new areas that were added to this map in 25. And just so everyone knows, every late spring, we reach out to all the, city and county health or sorry, not health restrictions, the actual jurisdictions themselves. We also reach out to all the haulers to say, hey, has your service area changed at all? Are there any new providers in your area? And that is essentially how that information gets updated as well. So like I say, you will want to pay attention every July how this will be impacting your farm.
And that's something that we can share with you. And Cullen, we did have 2 questions in the chat. Patrice asked, is there a list of facilities that will accept offal?
No, but I will take that as a recommendation. It is, I think as Sarah is alluding to, this is an ongoing conversation, a lot of different organics and ag networks to say, who is accepting offal? What is the solution here for this? So I'll take that. We do have some annual compost reports that I can reference there, and I will share that with you, Sarah, if I
Okay.
see any specific information related to offal. But yes, good suggestion.
And then Troy asked, is this information on the Department of Ecology website? How can we get this to distribute to our members? Troy is the executive director of the Northwest Meat Processors Association.
Yeah, I'm happy. I don't know, Troy. This is all on the website. I can send you that. I'll put it in the link after I chat, and then these slides I'm happy to share with you too if that would be useful.
And then we'll take a last question from Hannah.
Thank you all. My quick question is probably a 101 missing piece. The BOMAs, they exist. I guess I should phrase it more as a question. Do they exist because there are facilities in these places? And I mean, that's what would make the most sense to me, right? So they exist because there are places where the waste can go. And so you need to be following the rules, the requirements. And then if you're not within an area that is designated as having being part of this BOMA, then those rules just do not exist. And you don't, I mean, is that how that currently stands? That's how I'm interpreting that.
Yeah, that's a good interpretation. And I'm gonna, as with all policy, right, there's a little gray area, especially as like how the implementation rolls out. So correct. If you're let's just talk about Yakima. No, there is no BOMA currently in Yakima. Any producer that is in Yakima is not required to comply with those business organics requirements. And also you are right that if areas that are on the map are based on a service provider being willing to take on the organic material and having enough capacity to do that. We have heard, that said, right, this is the gray space, we have heard of areas in the state where the landfills have started to say we aren't willing to accept various types of organic material because of those 2030 diversion goals. So, and these are in areas where there's not currently BOMA business requirements or residential requirements, but county officials are looking at the long term and saying, well, we know that truly ecology does have the authority in 2030 to say, wow, we're not nearly reaching our goals, so we are going to make this a statewide mandate. And what, again, that is just a brainstorm. That's just nothing of like that is happening, but we do have the authority to create stricter rules in 2030 if we're not nearing our goals. So that has been an impetus for some counties to say we're not accepting some organic materials, even though we're not in a BOMA. And then the other thing I just wanted to note is that there are 2 things. And how am I doing on time here, Sarah?
We're getting close, but I think maybe another couple minutes.
Perfect. Okay. I just want to mention 2 other things. The first is that sadly, from my perspective, this was an unfunded mandate. And this is impacting counties, cities, schools, businesses, the whole 9 yards. And it's not lost on ecology, or certainly not lost on me, that in order to make these big changes, we do need some capital to invest in this future. And so we at Ecology did put in a significant grant to EPA in April, which we are waiting to hear back in July, but around 72 million of it would be to go directly to supporting organics law, management law implementation, which some of that would also go to composting facilities to enable them to better be equipped to accept waste like offal and things of that nature. And there would be an incentive tied to it, right? That we need to diversify the type of material we're accepting, including food waste, because many of our facilities currently don't accept food waste, and including offal. But also here facility, it's some investment to allow you to have some equipment and some odor control equipment to manage this. So that's a piece of the puzzle. The second piece that I want to give you a little good news here too, and maybe you are all aware of this, but the law also establishes a compost reimbursement program. So if you are looking for any type of soil amendments or compost to support any type of crops you're growing, Department of Ag runs this program, but you are eligible. You see here $10,000, but in this past year it changed to $20,000. All producers are eligible for $20,000 of compost reimbursement costs, including equipment that you might need to rent or whatever to spread the compost or transport it. So this program was super popular last year, and it was oversubscribed. And maybe one of the ag folks knows better than I do, but the 2024-25 program for this should be being released on this website next month. So that's what I have. Oh, go ahead.
Add the change that happened this year about what facilities you're allowed to purchase compost from.
Yeah, exactly. So they also expanded the types of facilities that you were able to purchase from. So now it not only includes permitted facilities, but also permit exempt facilities. So there is an updated this website, and again, I can happily put that in the chat, should include the updated list of compost facilities that you would be able to purchase products from.
In my view, that's a really exciting change, because if you are a facility that's considering compost because you have the land or you also operate a farm and can operate under one of these exemptions, you can now have a captive audience, let's say, for your compost products. So I think that's exciting if that's a potential option that you're considering for managing your waste.
That's a great, thank you for making those connecting those dots, Sarah. I think that's a great point. So that was my main thing that I wanted to hit on. I am more than available, and let's see if I have a slide here. There's a few other slides here that are not relevant, but I do just want to provide you this is me. So if you are interested, again, we recognize that we're asking folks to do something that hasn't been done before, and Ecology is here to kind of support you thinking about interesting partnerships. We've been trying to explore some partnerships with DOT to help them manage their roadkill, in partnership with small producers managing their offal waste. So that's currently an exploration in North Central Washington. So if you have interesting ideas, or like, Cullen, how do I get some funding to do this? Please reach out. That is a role I play.
Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. And please, continue to use the chat, contact Cullen, take down her contact information, and we'll be sure to share that in a follow-up email from this call. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Rachel Weemy from WSU, who's gonna do a little compost training advertising.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you so much, Cullen. That answered a lot of my question, and the folks that asked questions too, because those are some of the same questions I have as we talk about this, when we talk about composting as an option, one of the options for slaughter and offal waste. So yeah, I think the main thing I want to talk about today, Sarah, am I going to be able to share my screen?
I think so.
Okay, I'll do two things. I was going to pop this into the chat, but the main thing I wanted to be able to do today is to let you know about the update of what we've been working on with in the composting realm of things. So as Sarah said, we have, can you all see the screen?
Yep.
Getting it shared. Okay. So yeah, we've continued to have calls with the group, the awful group, I believe we call ourselves, where we talk about all things livestock composting. And so that applies sometimes to mortality composting or disaster response and things like that. But also really been trying to follow down this avenue of having discussions and or education and outreach on composting as a solution for awful waste. And so part of what we will be doing for that, there are a lot of arms and avenues to explore here. I think talking with compost facilities and getting you all information about either whether there are new compost facilities or other facilities that exist that would accept this material, but also doing outreach on for those processors or producer processors that might want to manage on site. We're putting on this awful composting workshop that will be focused mostly on folks that want to try to learn how to compost their offal themselves. And so this is something that, you know, various businesses throughout Washington, some are already doing. And so hopefully we have some of those folks with us to talk about that. So we're putting on the first of these workshops coming up here very soon in the beginning of July. So this first one will be on the east side in Moses Lake on July 10th. So I have the flyer up here, and as soon as I'm done talking, I'll just also put the link to the registration form directly in the chat. But I wasn't able to share a file, but I can send this out to anybody who wants it. I'm hoping, looking at the participants on this call, I think there's a lot of people that could help us advertise for this and get this out to your networks. And hopefully we can have a good group there to learn from each other. We are gonna schedule in a lot of time for some discussion. And so it's, you know, education on how to do this, but also us hearing, you know, what other resources are needed and that sort of thing to make this work. So I'm gonna pause. Are there questions? I'm able to just see first question. Will there be one on the west side? Yes. So we're starting with this one here on the east side this summer, but hopefully this winter we will also continue these on the west side as well.
Renee, do you want to host? Don't answer that.
Sure.
Yeah, that will be great to have some help with these. So we have some folks lined up to help us on the west side, but I will definitely contact you to help with that.
Sweet. Well, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
All right.
I highly recommend coming to the composting workshop if you have the ability to do so. It is going to be free. Of course, that's in Moses Lake. So depending on where you are in your state, you might have to travel to get there. But I think it's going to be a really great day. And I think Martin Quinn, who also works for the Department of Ecology and does some of the permitting for solid waste handling, or at least advises on that, especially with as it relates to offal and other livestock waste, is going to be there. So that's a great opportunity to track him down and maybe get some of your questions answered if you have specific composting questions. I just wanted to point out that Misha popped in the chat, and I will repost it, a link to a survey that's currently open about the WSDA compost reimbursement program. Highly recommend looking at that survey, filling it out as it's relevant to you, and having your voice heard to shape the future of that program. And with that, so we've talked a lot now about composting, and I think it's important at this point of the call to recognize that composting is a great solution for the processors that it works for. And those are processors that have enough land or may also operate a farm business, so they could operate under an agriculture exemption. But that composting does require a lot of space. It requires a lot of carbon inputs, and depending on your access to those, how much they cost, where they're coming from, composting may or may not be the best option for your business. And so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Martin from CSU to talk about kind of the rendering side of the fence, and then we'll close with some open discussion and ideas about what other types of waste management, whether it's some sort of aerobic or anaerobic digestion, dehydration, incineration, what other types of options we can kind of collectively brainstorm that this community may want to pursue going forward. Jennifer, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Sarah, and thanks for the opportunity to chat a bit about rendering today. I don't have formal slides, mainly because I think this is a better conversation to be had in a conversational style, just sharing some updates from a rendering lens. And then even in the open Q&A, asking any questions that folks may have around not only what the national landscape currently looks like in the rendering space, but what's on the horizon for the future. So rendering, as you all know, is a very old process that's been around for quite some time. And is a historical way of finding uses for products that may not meet the traditional demands of human food consumption and or pet food consumption. One of the challenges that the rendering industry has seen is a consolidation surge. And so very similarly to what we see in the large meat processing arena, many rendering companies over the past couple of decades, specifically the last decade particularly, have begun to consolidate and find themselves primarily housed alongside major meat packing plants. And there are several reasons for that. I think one of the reasons for that is the rendering landscape has changed. So traditional rendering facilities for many, many years served rural communities, not only by serving their meat processors, but also by serving farmers and ranchers who were looking to dispose of dead stock. But most of our commercial renderers in the past 10 to 15 years have stopped rendering dead stock for a couple of different reasons. One of those is the rendering outputs, many of the rendering outputs. So when we're thinking about solid fats, liquid fats, meals, so such things as that, those are going into pet food processing facilities, and pet food processing facilities are regulated by FDA, which has very strict regulations on some of the things that are considered banned substances in pet food. So one of those that we talk about a lot in the rendering space is pentobarbital, which is often used as an animal euthanasia drug. And when animals are euthanized in facilities that also serve rendering for pet food markets or produce products that are going to pet food markets, the potential for crossover residue is high. And the potential for employee error, where maybe a facility isn't cleaned in between dead stock and other products going through the rendering process. And so there were lots of complaints. There was a period in time from a rendering perspective where some of the products going into pet food manufacturing facilities were contaminated with pentobarbital. It's probably something you've heard of in the news in the past 10 years. But what the ultimate story is, because of the risk, when we think about some of the high value products coming out of the rendering facilities, the risk of contamination from dead stock was really high. And so rendering facilities found themselves in a space of either trying to retrofit antiquated facilities to address the potential for cross-contamination, or to stop rendering dead stock and to have their primary audience for rendering be used cooking oils as well as products coming from meat processing facilities. What many of them have done is stopped rendering dead stock. And when they made that move, they found themselves serving a clientele that was primarily a meat processor or a food industry with used cooking oil, and gradually over time have begun to segregate themselves closer to our larger commercial facilities. and closing regional rendering facilities, which would have previously served farmers and ranchers in the community who needed to have mixed uses for a rendering facility. That transition, when we saw renderers stop serving farmers and ranchers and really serve only meat processors, was a catalyst that has accelerated the consolidation among the rendering industry. So there have been some really massive mergers in the past couple of years where rendering plants that did have regional locations have merged with larger plants that primarily serve the major packers and have closed their rendering facilities. That said, one of the things that the federal government, as well as many folks in the meat industry space, specifically I think about the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network, some other service providers, if you will, for small and mid-sized meat processors, have been raising the concern that this is such an extensive cost and a pervasive cost for our small and mid-sized processors that we need to do something to serve processors who are currently, either to Sarah's point, are kind of land strapped, so composting isn't an option for them, and they're left with paying significant disposal costs. So we've been, I won't say lobbying, that's probably not the right term, but we've been promoting the conversation around what are the opportunities to fund and to reinvest in regional or smaller scale rendering facilities to serve our mid-scale and small size meat processors. And it's taken a long time, but I think one of the things that we've seen in the past year is finally some recognition from the Biden administration's investment in the meat processing capacity to set aside funding to promote the development of rendering facilities. And we have been told that this is the first, from a rendering industry perspective, this is the first of a series of funds that will go on to support regional rendering facility development. Now, what that means, though, is we have major renderers who've consolidated over time who are now in a space where they can expand to regional markets or to regional facilities. That is a harder sell to take a rendering company that is making good business being housed next to a commercial meat processor and making a business case for them to move to smaller areas, rural communities, or regional rendering facilities. So that's going to be certainly a big lift, but I think what we've seen, I think a positive direction is the investment and the acknowledgement from the federal government that this is a key piece of infrastructure for small and mid-sized processors, and stating publicly through the announcement of funds that they are willing to invest in regional rendering facilities. We'll see what comes out, right? Like what, if any of these larger rendering companies provide proposals that may lead to the development of regional rendering facilities, or if there are new companies that may enter the marketplace just to offer smaller or regional rendering opportunities. But I think the acknowledgement from the federal government that this is a key piece of the meat supply chain that is currently serving harm to small and mid-sized processors by not having access to regional rendering facilities is a win in the interim. And then futuristically, having continued conversations with either new companies in this place or in this space, or those existing rendering companies to consider expansion back into regional facilities is work yet to be done. But I think we're excited about the opportunity now that we've seen some acknowledgement of the challenge from the federal government. The other thing I will say is the rendering industry themselves. So specifically the North American Rendering Association, you may have previously heard of them as the NRA. So they used to be the National Rendering Association, but recently changed their name about 3 years ago now. They also have acknowledged the role, I think, that rendering plays intentionally in the conversation of sustainability. And if we are to have a conversation around sustainability can't just fall on the shoulders of those who are the big four packers. And so how they can lean into the small and mid-sized meat processor networks to advance their story of a sustainable sector of the ag and food industry. And so that's a conversation that's happened relatively recently within their organization, is how in the past the organization really migrated alongside the companies to serving those large commercial renderers who are housed next to commercial meat packers, but now have kind of taken a step back and said, from an industry perspective, the best story that rendering can tell is their contributions to sustainability of food and meat production. And in order to tell that story more effectively, they need to serve small and mid-sized meat processors. And so there's a group within the organization who is thinking about not only how can we capitalize and leverage the investment of dollars from the federal government, but how the association itself can incentivize and encourage their rendering facilities to consider how they may serve small and mid-sized processors. So I often look at what we have in Colorado. So we have a meat facility on our campus. The closest rendering facility to us is about an hour away. We're fortunate because of our existing research relationships with that rendering company that they will serve our meat processing facility on campus. But it shouldn't be a privilege that you have to have a certain capacity or you have to have a certain volume of production to have access to regional facilities. So even though we are a privileged processing facility because of our existing relationships, we have peer processing facilities in our own community who aren't served by that same renderer. So they can clearly make the drive to pick up our render materials for rendering. Why can't they serve the other facilities in our area? And so opening doors and being a conduit, I think, is the primary role the association sees themselves in playing, rather than right now it's a lot of volume-based requirements that often preclude some of our small and mid-sized processors from having access to rendering facilities. So I noticed just a couple of comments in the chat. The comment about dead stock. Absolutely. This is a major challenge that farmers and ranchers still have on their shoulders of how to dispose of dead stock. Interestingly enough, that challenge has been taken up by the American Vet Med Association because it's not only costly for farmers and ranchers, it's a liability that we see the veterinary community who is not willing to take on because of the implications, right? So we even see in some spaces across rural Colorado, veterinarians who aren't willing to make euthanasia calls because of the disposal requirements that they're aware of. And the chain of command, if you will, the chain of custody rather, if a veterinarian administers euthanasia drugs to a horse, for example, who then takes responsibility for proper disposal of that animal? Is it the owner of the horse? Is it the veterinarian? So it's a massive challenge. And I think one that I don't think the American Vet Med Association recognized the burden this was placing on our farmers and ranchers of one, having limited access to those services, but the larger challenge of disposal of those animals, which have to be euthanized or are dead stock for other reasons. So I appreciate the comment. I think one of the things that we've learned is it's a really complex nut to crack. And we tend to focus on the parts of that problem that have controlled substances, right? When we're using the euthanasia drugs, and recognizing that that's a small percentage of the number of dead stock that we have. And so having the conversation for the larger amount of dead stock that die of natural causes without euthanasia drugs, that hasn't happened to the extent that we've seen the big focus on the animals which are euthanized with controlled substances. So I think it's a really important call out. And hopefully once AVMA establishes some processes for how those animals which are euthanized are controlled for farmers and ranchers, they'll also expand the conversation for supporting the disposal of dead stock. I don't think we're going to see renderers take on dead stock, though. The other question about the euthanasia breaking down, that's a really great question. There are a couple of research studies that are happening right now, from a historical perspective, we do know that those drugs are destroyed in a traditional rendering process. There are 3 studies that I'm aware of that are looking at the degradation of those controlled substances in composting. I haven't seen results, but those were commissioned by the American Vet Med Association. So that's a great question. And it'll be exciting to see what those results look like.
Tommy
you
or
repeat
Ben,
that?
do you have any further
Sorry,
insight
Sarah.
into that? I was just wondering if Tommy or Dr. Ben Smith had anything to add.
Hey, yeah, I just dropped something in the chat. I don't have the full reference. This is just off the top of my head, but Josh Payne, formerly at Oklahoma State, and Gene Bonital at Cornell have done a couple different studies in each of their states and in collaboration on pentobarbital residues in compost and the 6 to 8 inches of soil below the compost pile. Quickly, it persists. It's detectable, whether within the soil system or within compost. Any other organism could get an effective dose is unknown. The efficacy is unknown. And then there are plenty of cases of scavenger animals, eating carcasses that were euthanized with a barbiturate and then getting barbiturate toxicity, if not, also sometimes leading to death. So it is an issue, and composting could still be okay, but there are unknowns. So we think, like, I did a horse for a woman recently, and we got the AVMA cranial landmarks for precise gunshot, and had a professional shooter who was willing to put down the horse, coincidentally standing right on our base of wood chips. So that was just part of the logistics, but also obviously at that point of euthanasia. So we avoided the barbiturate in that case. So I'll cut myself off there.
I'll also just take this opportunity to introduce Tommy. Tommy Bass is a professor at Montana State University, and also with Jennifer and myself, part of the Regional Food Business Center. He's one of the co-leads of the animal protein theme team, and has a lot of experience with carcass composting and offal composting. So if you're looking for troubleshooting advice or connections, Tommy's a great person to be connected with as well.
So I just want to acknowledge the conversation in the chat a bit about the rendering effects on deactivating many of the barbiturates which are used for euthanasia. There's a lot of research that demonstrates that deactivation. The question around, well, why don't they continue to accept dead stock then? There is a huge liability of cross-contamination as well as employee error, but often what I see, so here at CSU, we have an organization called the Pet Food Alliance, where we bring the pet food manufacturers together with their rendering companies and have conversations around topics like this. And science doesn't always sway the perception. And so if there is a human error or cross-contamination, even though we know the process works, the pet food facilities still then are stuck with the public perception that there's horse meat from dead horses in my dog or cat's food. And that tends to be a non-starter for many of our rendering companies when they're selling meals, fats, and oils to pet food manufacturers, that if they are also manufacturing dead stock, they won't accept the load because of the public perception challenge that they would face from a pet food manufacturing. So I think one of the other parts that we see in the rendering space is the products coming from rendering facilities are used by such a diverse portfolio of customers. Perception plays a role in that market, right? And so in the ag side, we understand well how that might happen, or how cross-contamination, or maybe acknowledge the science that that we are eliminating the active drugs that are in that animal. But when we're selling products to cosmetic companies that have cruelty-free statements, or pet food companies that don't want to have the perception of horse meat included in those foods, that perception piece is really difficult to weave its way around. And so we've seen many rendering companies who've said, unfortunately, that the money is in those large market clients and not in the farmers and ranchers who bring dead stock to them. And so they've made a business-based decision that has, as we've acknowledged here, really massive implications on the ag sector, and highlights this other challenge that kind of complements the rendering access challenge itself.
Thank you, Jennifer. It's great to hear kind of a more, get ourselves tied into the national perspective of what's happening in a larger conversation, and where there may be federal funds coming that could potentially support, you know, what if our regional facility could be in Washington, you know? So I appreciate, yeah, you coming on to share with us. And at this point, I think I'd like to open it up to kind of more general discussion, or if people have additional questions, either for the speakers or for any number of the experts that we have here today, please feel free to ask.
I'm curious about discussion for the short term. So for the meat processors that are potentially hearing from their landfills that they aren't being accepted, but they don't have any other options, what's sort of happening right now?
I mean, from our perspective, it's definitely been conversation, and we're hearing it from, you know, lots of different angles. And that was the impetus for this DOT partnership. And so seeing like, if you know, does DOT have the space where they're already managing their roadkill? That would be an animal protein waste that we would be composting then, in addition, where any offal waste could come too. So of course, you know, the $1 million question there is like, okay, great. Like, where's that funding going to come from to get this started? There is some precedence, you know, DOT does have one composting roadkill facility in Chewelah. So that's been a conversation. You know, I think this is where we're at as a state. We're at the very beginning of this. And when you look at the BOMA map too, you do recognize that we need more facilities across the entire state to handle this. And we need, like, again, the majority, I would say, right now we have about 60 facilities that are required to report to us on an annual basis, and about 12 of them are accepting pre and post consumer food waste. So that's a very limited amount as well. And so yeah, I think the short answer is we're at the very beginning of this, and we are recognizing a need to invest in other infrastructure to support this. So from an enforcement perspective, you know, they won't be penalized, but I'm understanding, right, like, where is it going to go if it can't go to the landfill? I don't have any good answers.
Another thing that we're working on within the WSDA, so some of you may have heard about a group called the Awful Group, which meets the first Thursday of every month. It's a collaboration of folks from Department of Ecology, WSDA Regional Markets, WSDA Dairy Nutrient Management, Veterinary Health Services, that get together to talk about these issues, and issues like we just talked about with the animal euthanasia that overlap between our various different specialty sectors within this bigger waste conversation. And so that group has had the opportunity to put forth a proposal for a climate resilience plan strategy to address animal composting, both for mass mortalities, but also for everyday composting. So right now we're putting together a funding request to the state legislature for this upcoming session to request funds for technical assistance, possibly some grant funding, either for pilot projects or for infrastructure improvements to support alternative ways or of dealing with livestock waste, mostly focused on composting, potentially also focused a little bit on digestion. So we're hopeful that that will be approved by the state legislature and that we can move forward with maybe even some, starting the conversation to think about regional composting facilities or helping facilities reconfigure their recipes so that they can take offal if they don't currently. So that's an exciting thing that's currently in the works. Yeah, Aslan.
Just wondering, one thing that we did not talk about today at all is like what can go into a wastewater treatment plant. And I know that that's, very specific to the wastewater treatment plant, but just as a future topic, just getting a sense of what can go in general, or, what would be involved in a like a pre-treatment, sub plant on our processing facility, things of that nature. As a future topic. And certainly I know we didn't cover the digesters today, but more information or leads on digesters, where we're at in the state, what they can and cannot do, or even theoretically at this point, would be very helpful moving forward. And I guess while I have the floor, just wanted to confirm that this is being recorded. And is going to be sent out not just to those who attended, but to everyone on the WA meetup list? Okay, great, because I know some people who were not able to make it who are asking. So thank you.
That's a great lead into these other two things that I wanted to share. Aslan, thank you. So I just wanted to highlight two additional resources. One of them is this NMPAM webinar, Innovations in Waste Management for Meat Processors, and I'll add that to the chat. So if you're not familiar, the niche NMPAM stands for the Niche Meat Processors Assistance Network. This is a program that's run out of OSU, Oregon State University, and they are kind of the premier service provider for small to mid-size meat processing facilities. And this is a great webinar. It talks about different types of digesters, other waste alternatives. So point that one out. And then also another great resource is the Meat and Poultry Technical Assistance Program. So this is a USDA funded technical assistance program. It's run through the Flower Hill Institute. They do all kinds of technical assistance for meat and poultry processing. And they had a recent webinar on, where did it go? On byproduct breakdown, composting, and biodigestion. So they talked to a number of experts, I think Tommy was maybe on presenter on that call as well, talking about composting options as well as aerobic biodigestion. So just wanted to point those out if you're looking for more information. Those are two great resources to be aware of.